Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm the local therautist or an autistic therapist, Mel, here, and today I want to talk about different kinds of coping skills and when to use them in different situations. So, when I talk with my clients about coping skills, I very quickly found that, like myself, they often struggled with having maybe like one kind of coping skill, i.e., distraction, um, and not very many other varieties of coping skills to use. So I wanted to break this down to talk about when using a coping skill that is distraction might be helpful and when it might actually be hurting you. So we'll go ahead and start with the first one, which is distraction. So, distraction coping skills are those things that are kind of self explanatory. Things like watching TV or playing a video game or even doing puzzles, things like that. Something to kind of take your mind off of and even ignore what's been going on. Some of these coping skills that we'll go over belong to more than one category. For example, like puzzles, that might be something in more of a grounding category as well, but it's also a distraction. Distractions are great to use when the situation you're struggling with is overwhelming or your feelings are overwhelming and you're not really sure what to do. So, for example, if things kind of feel chaotic and you're really upset, sometimes going on and watching Netflix or watching a video on YouTube or um, hopping on a computer game for a little while allows you to have that separation and that time to sort of calm down. When this becomes a problem is when this is our main coping skill and we're avoiding the problem. So, for example, if you keep having arguments with your significant other, and every time you have an argument, instead of solving the problem, you go to a distraction. Maybe you like go shopping, or maybe you, again, watch TV or start doing something else, playing with Legos or something. Um, at the end of the day, there has to be a time when you deal with the problem at hand. Um, Distraction also includes dissociation. I can do a deeper dive on dissociation, but essentially, dissociation is like a separation from yourself or from like the situation at hand. And dissociation can occur on a continuum. So, dissociation in just the average person might look like driving to work and then kind of forgetting along the way what that where you drove, right? So I think most of us have experienced this where we're driving somewhere, it's somewhere we always drive to, and we get to our destination and we realize that, oh, I wasn't even present during the last, however many minutes. And that's kind of like a lower level of dissociation. But in higher levels of dissociation, it can become problematic, especially if you're in this kind of um, emotional state for an extended period of time, because dissociation can feel like you're living life on autopilot. It can maybe feel like you're like a robot. Like maybe there's some emotion in there, but you just can't access it. Or maybe it feels like things aren't real. Maybe cognitively, that things are real, but you feel like you're in a dream or a fog, or things are too bright or too dull. Um, and if this continues over a long period of time, it causes a lot of issues, including, disconnection from other people. And at some point, um, it can be really, really distressing if this is kind of like how you live your life. Another thing to talk about when it comes to distraction and dissociation, there are times when this is um, somewhat healthy, right? So, say for example, I just got into a major car accident, and um, I have my kids in the back seat, and there's so many things to do. I'm overwhelmed. It's a natural kind of adaptation for us to kind of separate. This is why sometimes you'll see people who deal with chaotic situations, but they're really calm. And it's not necessarily that they're okay, it's just that there's kind of like a separation between themselves and the situation. So in this situation, maybe it is a good thing. Maybe instead of, falling apart and freaking out, maybe you do need to be aware enough to make sure everybody's safe and call 911 and um, do all the things that it takes. And then at some point, the goal is to kind of come back in to yourself and feel those feelings. But again, this can be problematic if, say, for those of us who've lived in chaotic situations for extended periods of time, this kind of might feel like our baseline for a little bit. And I can go into that more in some other videos, but just something to keep in mind. The second kind of coping skill are grounding skills. These are skills that are kind of under the mindfulness umbrella. They bring us back to here and now in reality. And these are really great to use if you particularly struggle with anxiety. Um, if you're, pretty keyed up, if you feel kind of disconnected, like you keep distracting, you keep in this cycle of dissociation. These are good skills to use, and these include things like breathing techniques, yoga, the 5 4 3 2 1 grounding technique, which I can go over in another video. Basically looking at your surroundings, sometimes even just telling yourself that you're safe and doing a body scan and just kind of being present. um, these are really good to use to kind of calm yourself down when you're in a heightened state. So if you are kind of starting to freak out and become really dysregulated, this could be a good way to get yourself to calm down. And again, this might not be the best skill to use when, in the example I said before, so maybe I'm in a car accident, and that's probably not the right moment to come to the present. Um, maybe I'm in an emergency, or I need to kind of be dissociated in order to get through something really difficult. In those cases, I wouldn't necessarily want to ground myself so that I can feel how anxious and how awful I feel, because maybe that's not safe in the moment, which is why dissociation is um, a natural coping skill for many people. The third coping skill is emotional release. These are things like crying or laughing. I like to watch a lot of comedy videos, um, punching a pillow, screaming into a pillow, um, heavy exercise, things like that, that really kind of exert a lot of energy. And these are really great to use when you're having really intense emotions, especially anger. Emotional release, having healthy emotional um, releases throughout the day or kind of set into your lifestyle can be really helpful to manage this, especially that intense exercise. It's really good for anger and anxiety, because sometimes we have all this energy that gets trapped in our bodies. Maybe we were in a situation where we needed to dissociate, and now we're no longer in that situation, and so maybe we need to use an emotional release to kind of exert that energy. So this is kind of like when we're really up here, or using kind of like a DBT opposite action skill. If you're depressed, an emotional relief an emotional release via like comedy shows, things like that. Something funny can help kind of shift your mood from depressed to maybe happy or maybe just a little bit more energetic. The fourth one is self love. Self love is really great to use if you struggle with kind of prioritizing yourself, or if you're like a caretaker of other people. One of my favorite sayings is, you can't pour from an empty cup. Sometimes I like to kind of shift my mindset from I'm doing this to myself to I'm doing this so that I can fill my cup so I can take care of other people. If that's how you need to do it, or however else you need to do it, sometimes, that's okay, whatever it takes to take care of ourselves. Self love can be really difficult if we struggle with shame, or we feel like we don't deserve it, or we don't need it, or that we are responsible for other people. And it's also important to push yourself to try to do things that show yourself self-love. And this could be anything from doing a self-compassion meditation. It could be something as simple as like taking a bath or a shower, um, taking care of the dishes now so that way when you wake up in the morning you don't have to. For many people it could look like doing your nails or getting a haircut, things like that, things that kind of cater to you and fill your cup. The fifth coping skill category um, is cognitive challenging or cognitive reframing. This is really good to use if you struggle with having a lot of those like cognitive distortions, maybe a lot of that black and white thinking, a lot of catastrophization, a lot of overgeneralizing. So, looking at your thoughts and challenging them, are they true? Are they false? I tend to steer clear of this one more often than not. I like to use a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. So, personally, some of the modalities that I use focus less on challenging thoughts and more on accepting that your thoughts are there and recognizing that we are not our thoughts. But for many, many people, cognitive challenging can be really, really helpful in identifying those pitfalls, those kind of like spots in our judgment that aren't so great. Some of the challenges with cognitive challenging um, can include things like maybe you really aren't able to see some of those biases. Maybe you write them down, but you still don't see what's biased. So you have to be able to look at something objectively. Sometimes, if you're really emotional, it can be really hard to do this because you might not be able to come up with anything to challenge some of your thoughts. So basically, with thought challenging, what you do is you kind of write the. I like to personally write things down. You don't have to, but writing down the thought and the feelings that are associated with the thought, and like what kinds of assumptions are coming up for you. What's the evidence for and against this thought, and what is maybe a more balanced view of this thought. This also includes cognitive reframing, which I personally do quite often. As I said in the last one, I often reframe my brain to think of things in a different way. For example, I used to struggle a lot with being assertive, and I have daughters. So I would reframe my situation. So when I was in a situation where I needed to be assertive, I would ask myself, what would I want my daughters to do? And then I would just do that because I know they learn by watching, so that I have to model that behavior. So then, whenever I encounter situations now where I need to be assertive, I think of it as a challenge. I get to practice something I'm not very good at. Yay for me. Even if I'm being a little sarcastic, sometimes it's still really helpful to change the way I think about a situation. Because a lot of our suffering comes from how we view a situation. If I go into a situation and I'm thinking that it's going to be the worst thing in the world, that's going to color my view of how everything happens. The things that people say, um, body language, maybe I pass or fail, or maybe things go well or they don't go well. But regardless, um, my mood, my thoughts about the situation are going to color how I feel about it. And so, another caveat with this, cognitive challenging in particular, if you are somebody who struggles with OCD, this might not be a good one to use, especially if you're trying to argue or challenge the obsession, because in OCD is treated completely different than many other anxiety disorders. Um, and I can have videos on just OCD if anyone's interested in that. Um, but long story short, we don't want to go down the rabbit holes, because with OCD, your brain's just going to come up with another obsession, something else to kind of flip the switch about and freak out about. And so challenging every single one of those is not really getting to the root of the problem, and really can just kind of, like, you're just going to go around in circles. All right, so the final type of coping skill is accessing your higher self. Now, this could be something like helping somebody, volunteering, complimenting people, doing like random acts of kindness. This could be engaging in some kind of spiritual practice, or engaging, if you're religious, engaging with, your religion, things like that. Something that is more than yourself. And I do want to add that spirituality and religion are separate. So when I talk about those things, I like to focus more on the spirituality aspect of it, because, many people have their views on religion. Whatever you believe, that's your choice. And if you want to go to church and to access your higher self, that's fine. But there are many people that, for them, spirituality just means getting close to nature, or just means kind of, looking and philosophizing about your place in the world, and how people and beings and all of the universe is kind of connected. So, whatever that looks like to you, accessing your higher self can be really helpful if you're struggling with feeling uh, unaccomplished, or maybe you don't feel like you have direction or purpose in the world, which is something that a lot of people struggle with. It helps to kind of realign your idea of what your life looks like, essentially, because you're, by helping others, by recognizing things that are bigger than yourself, it kind of changes your perception and your reality, and you become kind of less egocentric, right? Not that ego is necessarily a bad thing, not that thinking about ourselves is necessarily a bad thing, because we need a balance of that. But sometimes we get stuck in the trap of thinking about ourselves too often, whether that's in the positive or negative. So if I'm thinking about how awesome and fantastic and amazing I am, that can kind of be like an inflated ego, and that can really, some people can really struggle with that. But the opposite's true, where maybe I'm thinking I'm the worst person in the world, I'm awful, everybody hates me, I'm a burden. That's kind of like a deflated ego. And both of those extremes are not healthy, where we're thinking about ourselves a lot. And so if you struggle on one of those ends of the spectrum, doing things to access your higher self can be really, really helpful. So those were 6 different kinds of coping skill categories. Thanks for watching if you made it this far. If you have any questions, comments for me, leave them down below. If you'd like to see any videos on any other topics, let me know down below. And thanks for coming to my fake abode here. And I look forward to providing you guys with more content here in the future.